Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and it occurred to me recently that I don't think I've ever told you how much I like aquariums. I like the big fancy ones that you go to in cities, the giant ones that are like attractions, but I like to make my own aquariums. I haven't done it for a while, but it's something I really enjoyed doing for years and years. Maybe someday I'll get to it again. For a while, I had 3 aquariums, we're going to go with aquariums, in my house. I had a saltwater aquarium, and then I had a freshwater aquarium, but then I also had a salty freshy aquarium, like half and half. I think they call that a brackish tank. And it was my favorite aquarium ever because it was very thoughtful about my strategy for it. I built this really cool environment before I put any fish in there. I decided what the plants were going to be like and how it was going to look. And it was just a lovely, lovely setup. And I built it such that it would be the headboard for my bed. Now, some of you who are into interior design probably just threw up in your mouth a little bit, and right now you are chewing that back. I'd like to partially apologize for what I just did to you, but if you're like me and you like aquariums, you're thinking, dang, that's rad, man. That's a baller move. You put an aquarium for your headboard? That's pretty cool. What kind of fish you put in there? Well, thank you for asking, because it's exactly the right question. I built this great environment, and then finally it comes time for me to decide what goes in the thing, and I decided I was going to be really picky. I wanted something that would be awesome, that would tell a story to go inside of this environment. And so I decided to build the whole thing around archer fish. You've seen these in nature videos and stuff. These are the fish that have a flat top and a trapdoor mouth, and they go up to the top of the water and they spit and they knock down little ants and bugs and stuff, and they gobble that up. And so we made this headboard. We put the fish in there and a few other complementing fish. This is an amazing environment. And there's the likewise right there. I'm going to come back to in a minute, but I got to tell you this other part first. Well, several months go by, and we're in a rhythm with the tank. It's healthy and it's established. And one morning I'm laying there, the sun's peeking through the window, and I feel moisture on my face. You can tell where this is going. I'm like, where's that coming from? Is it dripping? Is it from the ceiling? Am I sweaty? I'm not sweaty. And I figured out the archer fish, as soon as the sun would come up, they would get hungry, and they figured out I'm the one who feeds them. And since they couldn't shoot down the food, they would go to a couple of the little gaps in the tank, and they would shoot me with water to wake me up in the morning so that I would feed them food. Is that not the coolest thing ever? That's the kind of relationship I had with my fish. But backpedaling for just a second to the actual point of me telling you the story. I built this cool environment, and because the environment was so rad, I put a lot of thought into what I wanted to put in that environment to live there. Likewise, that is what Nehemiah has got to do, because he's got a basically empty Jerusalem, and it's a great place to live, but it's also a key piece in this grand narrative of history, this living story that is being played out that Nehemiah's a character in. And now the environment's built, the metaphorical aquarium's built, and he's got to figure out who's going to be in there and what that is going to mean and how it's going to work. And in the same way that I was incredibly careful with what kind of fish would live in the tank and make sure that I put complementing fish in there that would work well and make the tank do what I wanted, so Nehemiah is apparently going to be real careful and smart with how he fills up this mostly empty but entirely awesome city that he has got fixed up and ready for prime time. Nehemiah 7:4. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. We talked yesterday about the prophet Haggai and how he pointed out there was a problem with people caring too much about building their houses early on in the game. Calls them out. Well, God calls them out for worrying too much about their own houses and not enough about God's house. There's a total flip among the people, and they're like, sorry, we're putting our houses on hold. Let's rebuild God's house. They do a great job, and apparently most of them never get back around to building cool houses for themselves, and the place isn't fully populated. Verse 5, Nehemiah talking here. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. Now, this is a really interesting solution to an underpopulation problem, because it sounds like what he's fixing to do is to be even more picky and particular with who's allowed to live in there. And I think it's interesting, too, as a side note, that this is the third time in that many pages, one page, yeah, literally one page for me, that the nobles have come up. These people have been finicky and weird and quirky. They've been all over the map, but Nehemiah has called them out directly. That is in chapter 5 for their economic abuses. He's called them out directly at the end of chapter 6 for their loyalties being wishy-washy at best. And he's cut them off at the knees. He's undercut their power and authority economically and politically here in the beginning of chapter 7 by appointing Hananiah and Hanani to be in charge of the city, and they're no friends to these nobles. The nobles are no longer on easy street. They're going to have a tougher time of it because they're not in a position to exploit and wield their power that way anymore. So now that they've been corrected, called out, and repositioned in this society, Nehemiah isn't just going to cast them out. They've been castigated. They've been corrected. No, instead, he's going to include them in this whole thing, along with people of varying social ranks, and he's going to point to history with this registration of the people to reorient everybody there to what it means to live in this great environment that they just got done building, to live in Jerusalem as a returning exile. I think what he's trying to communicate here is each of you humans, regardless of social status, because you are a part of this people group, chosen by God, descended from Abraham, and a people group for whom God still has a plan. He's still doing something with you. Because you are these people, even if you've been weird and screwy at times, living in this town of all towns, you are a part of something very important. You're the standard bearers, the torch bearers, the baton carriers of a brave, noble, important story that is bigger than just you and your immediate family. It's even bigger than your people group. This is going to be the thing that takes the whole world, Jews and non-Jews alike, by the hand and brings them into the presence of God and shows them the truth about that. There's a blessing to all the nations that is to come through these returning exiles. That's still promised here. And I think Nehemiah is trying to baptize them into the narrative. He's trying to get them to feel the story the same way he feels the story. So there's a real let bygones be bygones vibe here in Nehemiah 7:5, because God puts it into his heart to assemble the nobles. Well, it sounds like God put forgiveness in his heart then. That's great. And the officials and the common people for registration by families. What does that remind you of? The funniest thing, I can't hear you at all. I mean, because this is happening asynchronously and socially asymmetrically. I have no idea in any way what you just said, but I bet a whole bunch of you were like, it reminds me of little baby Jesus and the whole genealogy that kind of looks like what happens next here in Nehemiah with a whole list of names that happens at the beginning of Matthew. And you are correct. Well, I mean, I guess you could say it reminded you of anything and you'd be correct because that's just whatever it reminded you of. But to me, it reminds me of that other famous genealogy that we get later on, which also demonstrates a continuity in this whole story. And it demonstrates that the end point of that continuity is Jesus. He's the centerpiece of where all of these names and lists and begats were always going. So God puts it on his heart to assemble all of these people and to do this registration by families. It's kind of crazy that the registration by families that happens in Matthew chapter 1 is something that is ordered by a secular king, an emperor, Caesar Augustus. This one is happening under the authority of a ruler working under a great secular king, Artaxerxes. And here's how that plays out. Nehemiah says, I found the genealogical records of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. Now, this harkens back to a couple of themes as well. One is the idea of finding old records long hidden and forgotten that seemed unimportant at the time, but now looking back, we realize there's a continuity to this story. Remember, Darius went and searched through the records at Ecbatana and found the old decree of Cyrus, and finding those records is what gets the rebuilding back on track. This is not an accident. I said it was reminiscent of a couple things. It's also reminiscent, and I mean like really one for one reminiscent of Ezra chapter 2, which has basically the same list of names, the same genealogy as what we get here in Nehemiah chapter 7, but it's set in a completely different time. This is the list of names when it was recorded in the first place, when Zerubbabel led the captives back out of captivity and to go and rebuild Jerusalem in 538 BC. So here we are, 80 years later, 90 years later, and we're right back to this same list of names, even invoking the same language as Ezra chapter 2. Here's Ezra chapter 2, verse 1. Now these are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive to Babylon. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and some others. Okay, now back over here to Nehemiah 7:6. Here's how this goes. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, okay, and then some other names. Look at that. It's identical. And what he's doing here is he's demonstrating the symmetry of this 3-act story, right? The first dramatic thing is we're going to go back and we're going to rebuild the temple. The second big dramatic thing is we're going to go back and we're going to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem itself. And the third thing we're going to do is a little more subtle and not quite as dramatic, but it's the biggest of all the deals, and that is we're going to rebuild the people. And so the list of names we get next is indicative of that. And what we've got here is Nehemiah saying, how are we going to repopulate this awesome empty city that we've built? Well, we're going to do it very pickily with a carefully curated list of people who we're going to put into this metaphorical fish tank, because this metaphorical fish tank that is rebuilt Jerusalem isn't just a normal town. It's a town that tells a story. And on the other side of this repopulation is hopefully going to be something even more remarkable than my fish spitting on me to wake me up so I give them food. All right, that's plenty. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.